process for conversation design. The next thing after you think about your users and if it is like right for you to build a conversational experience is thinking about personality or persona of your voice assistant.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest on today's episode. Let's welcome Shiva Jaini. He has over 10 plus years of professional and research experience and 6 years of academic experience in product design and human-computer interaction. Currently, Shiva is working as Senior Staff Design Manager at Google and previously worked as Staff User Experience Designer at YouTube and Yahoo. He's also a keynote speaker at various occasions and also holds 13 patents on his name. In this episode, Shiva had shared great insights on designing for conversational experiences, where we discussed on what exactly are conversational experience and how different is it from other form of interactions that we do with these devices, and what are the various process and approach that one must follow while designing for this conversational experience and integrate the factor of seamless experience across all the multi-channels. The later part we discuss on how to design a character for these scenarios and make it feel like human while interacting with these devices, and also what are the various limitations that one must keep in mind while thinking of designing for conversational experiences. Hope you guys enjoy this episode, and on every Friday we release new episodes with different creative leaders from around the world to help you better understand different concepts related to design. So don't forget to tune in into Notes of Design every Friday. With that being said, happy designing everyone. Hi Shiva, welcome to Nodes of Design. It's a pleasure hosting you today on our show.
Same here. Thank you.
So Shiva, how's your day going?
It's been good. Like it's morning time here. So just like had breakfast and, getting ready for the day.
Wonderful, Shiva. If you could give a brief about yourself to our audience out there.
Yeah. So I'm a product design manager at Google and I manage a team of designers and researchers. I've been at Google like for 9+ years now. And I worked on a variety of product areas. I started with YouTube on the founding team for YouTube Kids, and I've been, then moved on to work on conversational assistants. First, as a part of a startup team that I founded in an incubator within Google called Area 120, and then our team, we joined the Google Assistant team to work on smart displays. Over the last close to 2 years now, I've been working on another product area that's called the Geo Enterprise team, looking at transportation and other verticals. I consider myself a design generalist and emphasize on my team having strategic impact. I like to work on system design problems and use the power of design to tell stories.
Thank you so much, Shiva. So what was your journey into design and how did you start? What are your tips to the beginners that you want to suggest?
Yeah, so my entry into design was a very happy accident. Initially, how I got into design wasn't very intentional. I gave the joint entrance exam for IITs, and as I was preparing or trying to figure out which undergrad program to get into, I learned about the design program at IIT Guwahati, and the program description had things animation, visual communication, things like that, which all sounded fascinating. But I realized this is one of the very few undergraduate programs in design. I had no idea what to expect. So I thought I was taking a risk, but from that point onwards, once I joined into the program, loved the field of design, and there was no looking back from there. I think it depends at what point in your career that you are in. But for young students who are still getting into an undergraduate program, for example, if they're interested in getting into design, I would suggest getting into a program that provides them the skills and exposure to look at problems from a holistic point of view. So any program that's a multidisciplinary in nature would be important, I think. And I think looking back at my undergraduate program, I think, surrounding yourself like with people that can broaden your thinking around what you as a designer can achieve, can help you identify like what's your true calling. Even within design, like there are a lot of specializations, but I think like to begin with, you should have a strong, well-rounded base to develop, and then you can figure out, okay, I might want to specialize in this area of design, for example. I think the beauty about like the design field is like folks from any background can enter into it and thrive in it, as long as like you have the curiosity, like the intellectual curiosity and analytical abilities, I think are important, and having empathy, right? Like being able to empathize with others, like who you're building for, is like really important. So having empathy and creativity and this like natural curiosity, I think are key things like that that are important, like to be a successful designer.
Thank you so much, Shiva. So let's begin our discussion today on designing for conversational experiences. So basically, what are conversational experiences and how different is it from other backgrounds?
Yeah, I think, conversational experiences are those where we as humans are interacting with like computing systems or machines, right? In a natural, bi-directional manner. But because the technology is still in early stages, like we have to carefully curate the experiences to some extent. And, one of the, I guess, like the key motivations behind conversational, experiences is that like more an experience is like leverages human conversation that, people develop since their childhood, the less they have to be taught on like how to use the system. No matter like what technology it is, like there is this like learning barrier that you have to overcome. But what's exciting about conversational design is anybody who can communicate in a human way can make a use of the system and get their jobs done. So that's exciting about it. I think like within conversational experiences, there are different kinds, right? Like and mostly defined by the communication modalities that you use. So you could have like text-based conversational design, for example, like chatbots that you might use. There could be like voice-only conversations. So there are devices like the smart speakers, and there are like many like voice-first experiences. So for example, assistant on your phone is you trigger it, but then like it's all like voice-first experience, even though there is a screen and there is a communication happening through the screen as well. And smart speakers, smart displays, right? Like those that are ambiently active and like kind of like listening for your commands, so on. And I think when it comes to how conversational design is, whether it's different from other disciplines or not, I think they're definitely different from like your web design or mobile design. But depending on the modality that you're designing for, leverages some of the same principles that you use for other design disciplines, right? Including voice interface design, interaction design, visual design, motion design, audio or sound branding. And I think like the other key important discipline that's really useful or like critical for conversation design is UX writing, with the copywriting and the content strategy part of it.
Thank you so much, Shiva, for helping us break it down so easily. So what is the process or approach you follow while designing for these conversational experiences? And how do you integrate the seamless factor of using it across different multi-channels?
So I think like first and foremost, right, like it's important like for you to determine like if conversation design is the right fit like for the experience that you want to build. And my experience like designing in this space is mostly with like voice first experiences. So yeah, like some of my responses might be more based on that experience. But the question I always like start with is, how does like voice add value? Is it the best modality, taking into account the users, target users, their context, their limitations or abilities, their goals? So you should, I think, like first start with like focusing on your users. Who are they? What are their goals and key use cases? What is the context that they are in? For example, like what me and my team like focused on was building an assistant for your kitchen that will help make your life in the kitchen like stress-free, mess-free, and fun. Few of the use cases like we wanted to support include like help me decide like what's for dinner, or like help me decide what to cook, help me track the food that I have, and help me buy groceries or stuff that I don't have. And lastly, but importantly, like help me cook the dish I wish to. And the context is like, you are often like multitasking when you're in a kitchen. You're stressed about like, often like trying to figure out last minute, like what should I make for dinner? And we wanted to kind of help solve that by having this like ambient, like audio visual assistant that can like recommend dishes for you based on your cuisine and diet preferences and your past history and all that. And so I think like the first thing I would start with is like focus on who you're building it for and what it is like that they're trying to do. And going back to that, right? I mean, very similar to how you might approach any product design, but I think like even with conversation like design. So the key thing is like, voice is good at certain things. And it's good like when, it's good for like speed, simplicity, and when you're like trying to multitask, for example, when your hands are busy or full, whether it is driving or cooking, having a assistant like that you can talk to set a timer rather than having to set timers with your messy fingers or ask for the next step in a recipe that you might be following. So these are all things that are important to take into consideration. And I think like in terms of like the process for conversation design, the next thing after you think about your users and if it is like right for you to build a conversational experience is, thinking about personality or persona of your voice assistant. And it should reflect your like brand's value and mission. And it's also like, context based, right? Like, and the personality that you might want to build for a, fitness coach or fitness assistant would be very different from like a banking assistant or kitchen assistant, right? So you'd have to spend some time thinking about like, what's the tone and personality that I might want to give to the assistant. That will dictate like how you might craft the dialogues or define like how the assistant might respond. Yeah. So once you have spent some time thinking about the persona, then I think like you move on to the next stage of like drafting like high level dialogues. You're almost like writing a movie script of like, this is the dialogue that I might start with and like how the system might respond. And this is important because you, as I mentioned, like because the technology is still nascent, unless you carefully curate the experience by crafting the dialogues, it's easy to veer off and go into dead ends where you might have to start over again. Or like paying attention to like what are the key use cases that I'm trying to build for, and then crafting the dialogues that you and the system, like you as a user and the system might communicate with. And once you have the high level flows mapped out, in the last 2-3 years, like the number of prototyping tools that are available for like voice design, conversation design have grown and matured quite a bit. So there are tools like Voice Flow or Adobe XD, part of the Creative Suite, Bot Society, and so on, that you can use to create early stage prototypes. And I think like one thing to stress on is like it's really important to test and iterate on the dialogues and the conversational experience with your end users as soon as possible, as early in the process as possible. Because like that opens up your team and like you to kind of like learn what are all the other ways like that your end users might interact with your system. So yeah, like those user studies will also help you kind of identify what are like potential detours like that people might take, incorporate those use cases into the dialogue setup. And also the last stage would be like thinking about a variety of like long tail use cases. And also like from a response point of view, in conversational, like in most assistant like design languages, like there is this thing called intents. And by like what's an intent is that you're essentially like thinking about the responses, like possible responses that a user might say to a question. For example, like, do you like ice cream? And the user might say yes, no, and then like you need to tell the system like if the user says yes, do this. If the user says no, do this. But then also like train the language model like with similar phrases, right? Rather than yes or no, you might say I love ice cream, or oh no, I don't like ice cream, or yeah or no. Like, there are a variety of ways like people express. So capturing each of these intents and like the training phrases for like the different responses will help prevent errors from happening. And even if like you spend time like thinking through the possible intents, the training phases, like errors still occur. So ensuring that the assistant is able to handle errors effectively, communicate like limitations appropriately, is also like important. So these are all like some of the things that I would go through in terms of like the design process.
Thank you so much, Shiva. So how do you deal the factor of accessibility here in these sort of situations?
Yeah, I think like that's where like the user understanding of like users and their limitations, abilities are important, and the modalities, right? Like, does the user have or like is the user expected to have a screen in front of them like while you're interacting, or like even in the case of like smart displays, you can't just like cut off on some of the audio or like the dialogue by assuming that the user would be just looking at the screen, right? They might be busy cooking something, so it's important to have some of the voice prompts to come through, and not just solely rely on like the display to communicate the response, right? So yeah, like modalities, the user's abilities, and the context and limitations. These are all important to take into consideration.
Thank you, Shiva. So how do you design a character for these scenarios that feels like a human while interacting with it? So sometimes if you see a website and I'm chatting with a chatbot and all of a sudden it feels like it's a bot. So, but there are a few instances where it doesn't feel like it's a bot. So how do you make sure that it doesn't feel like a bot?
Yeah. I think like it's about like how you craft the responses, right? Like how you craft the dialogue. So that's why like copywriting is really important. First, I think like as I was like telling earlier, defining the persona of your assistant, that's representative of your like brand's values is the first part, and like that persona should kind of like dictate like how the tone of the responses that you would have the system kind of like provide is also impacted. So one of the things that I usually start with is when it comes to defining the persona, like try to define the characteristics of the assistant. That assistant was a human. How do you describe the assistant, right? Like is it funny, friendly, confident, somebody trustworthy, and like the responses, the language and the tone will change based on if you're funny versus professional. And I think like that's key to making sure like feels natural and doesn't feel like you're talking to a bot. So as I was telling earlier, right, like if you're building a fitness assistant, maybe the assistant needs to bring the personality of a fitness coach. So it needs to be energetic, encouraging. Maybe like the person needs to be knowledgeable, and for a banking assistant, like maybe the assistant needs to have a personality of a banking professional that's trustworthy. From a privacy standpoint, like you can kind of like develop the trust to provide sensitive information to the bot. So these are all I think things that would help develop artificial assistants that are more natural.
So what are the limitations to keep in mind while designing for these sort of experiences? And what do you think is the future of conversational design going forward?
In terms of like technical capabilities, right? Like we are still scratching the surface. It's awesome and exciting, like to see like the early traction we're having, like with especially like some use cases. But I think like each modality by its own has its own limitations, right? And it's not appropriate like for to force fit like a certain modality by itself for all use cases. So for example, like if you think about like voice only experiences, it's not great when you need to read a menu of options, or you need to help like users decide between and compare easily, like without like visuals, like it might not be easy for you to pick which top or like which t-shirt you might want to choose from, right? So you have to understand like the limitations of each of the modalities. But I think like the future of conversational design is going to be more and more multimodal. I think like what's been like fascinating for me over the last, I guess like 2 to 3 years is how conversational assistants have been used in like various contexts. For example, like Google smart speakers or like smart displays are being used in hotel concierges, right? Like often, like there will be travelers who don't speak your native language. By having this interpreter that's there to help drive the communication between two different language speaking people is an awesome like use case, right? Like for how conversational design is able to help reduce the barriers. Similarly, I think I'm seeing a lot of like interesting startups in the space that's focused on building assistants for doctors, for enterprises, and also like when you're in the car, for example, in all the cases like where your hands are busy and voice is faster than having to pull out your phone and like tap on things and so on. Another like interesting like inspiring kind of like examples are I'm seeing in the markets such as India, for example, where Google Assistant is integrated into like the Geo phones, and there were millions of people like who are coming online via smartphones for the first time each day. For them, like seeing how an assistant is able to reduce the barrier of like exploring technology, making use of it in their daily lives is fascinating to see.
Thank you so much, Shiva. So on a concluding note, we would love to hear from you 3 favorite books of yours and also 3 people who inspire you the most in this ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm not a great reader of books, but listen to podcasts, like I read blogs a lot. Can share a few resources that way. So voicebot.ai is a like hosts like a podcast that invites a lot of like startup founders operating in the space, and many inspiring, exciting startups to check out. So if you're curious about like the use cases that people are applying conversation design to solve and like reduce barriers and improve people's productivity and so on, like that's a great podcast to check out. And when it comes to best practices and principles around good conversation design, Google has put out like design guidelines that can be a great resource like for beginners in the field. And there are also like blogs by Kathy Pearl, Cheryl Platts. Cheryl Platts is like a conversation design primer for it could be a great resource like for beginners who want to understand like the technology behind conversational design, the limitations, possibilities, and so on. In terms of like people, inspirational companies and people in the space, I find a few startups like Suki. Suki is a digital assistant for doctors that removes the burden of like transcribing like notes around patient history and like all that. Also seen like recently in between of like conversation design and typical interaction design in the form of like assistive UX design with voice. So a couple of products in the space are, I don't know if you've heard about this app called Bolo. It helps like with improving like reading for young readers, like kids and so on. And it's not like fully conversational, but it's very assistive in that it's able to understand what you're speaking and provide guidance and corrections in a real-time conversational way. Similarly, like there is a startup called Jaini, Jaini.io AI, and they are creating an assistant for helping people who are new to the internet, who don't have the confidence and who want to who always have to rely on their kids or people who are more experienced to do transactions online. They built an assistant like that will help walk through the steps that you need to do. Like for example, like to fill out a form or like to make a payment. They built out this assistant plugin like that any app developer can integrate into their apps. It will help, especially like in markets like India, where there are a lot of new people coming online for the first time, it will help reduce the barriers of adoption of technology and improve confidence in technology usage. So these are all like some of the companies and products and people in the space that I have been like fascinated by in the last couple of years.
Thank you so much, Shiva, for your wonderful time, and we would love to host you again in our upcoming episodes.
Absolutely, I would love to participate. It's been a pleasure.